Welcome into another Dynasty video. We are back once again now for the semifinals of the fantasy playoffs, going through our studs and our duds. I'm joined here as always with Ryan Cash Sharma. Before we get into it real quick, Ryan, how are you looking in your leagues? You advancing this week?
No, doesn't look good. My one league that I felt like I could win it all in, I'd ran into a terrible matchup with my opponent having Trevor Lawrence and Trey McBride this week. Both of those guys almost combined for like 100 points just because of the bonuses my league has. So I actually had a really good week. I had guys like Amon-Ra, James Cook on my team, but just didn't have enough. Dak was my quarterback. I was thinking of going Dak last week with the dud pick. And it looked like that would have been a good pick because he didn't get anything going in terms of touchdowns. So, fortunately, I don't think I'm advancing. How are you looking?
Well, one of them I had the bye week, so I'm looking good. But my opponent that I will be playing just scored 250 points. So
Jesus.
I'm a little nervous. I scored the second most over the week. I scored 180. So my team's been consistently putting up those kind of numbers. His team's been more boom or bust. So I feel confident that I can make it to the championship in that one. And then I advanced in my other league. So I went 2 for 2. I'm going to be in the semifinals in both my leagues that I made the playoffs in. But this was a 500 team. We went 7-7, won our matchup this week against another 7-7 squad. And I think this week we're cooked. But let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to recap, actually, our studs and our duds from last week in week 15 and show you guys just how fucking smart we are, essentially. I mean, it really doesn't get much better than this. Our studs and our duds. And you might sit there and be like, oh, it's a little handpicked. I don't care. We went technically 19 for 23 because we're recording this while Jalen Waddle is playing football. So no confirmation on how he's going to do, if he's going to hit that number or not. I probably should have put his projected numbers up there, but I went a perfect 8 for 8, a domination. Ryan only having 2 misses, which you could argue one of them with Jordan Love is
he had a real life dud. Real life dud. Fantasy 16.7 is not the end of the world, but real life 2 picks, a lot of sacks, lost the game. So
comparative to what he's been putting up, that was a dud. And then James Cook was a big miss on Lucas's end. He ended up with 31 points. And then Tyler Warren was his projected stud last week. And Ryan, on the flip side, had him as a dud. And Ryan was correct in that one. And yeah, you got screwed on Jordan Love, in my opinion. You don't normally see, especially for a guy who's been averaging like 22 points over his last like 4 or 5 games. That's just a tough draw because he goes into that game in Denver only projected 14 points. So, and I think overall, in terms of a fantasy perspective, from what he's been doing the last couple of weeks, it's a dud in my book. But based off the projections, he surpassed his projected amount against a good defense.
Yeah, and I think like I know obviously us going 19 for 23 is extremely impressive, but I think the most impressive part was like some of the hits and the amount of like variance in there and like the big hits that we had. I mean, you could throw it back up. Kyle Pitts, that one was huge. And then some of our duds, man. Look at our receiver duds: Justin Jefferson, George Pickens, Ted McMillan. Those guys had terrible games. So it wasn't just that we hit by going over under the projection by a little bit. We were like dead on some of these. So we can repeat that.
Yeah, there's obviously a few close ones in here. You got like your 22 getting a 23, that's over. But that's still very impressive. You're getting 23 points out of a player. But yeah, Kyle Pitts was huge for me. Jameson Williams was huge for me. I nailed those ones. And then our receiver duds were just immaculate across the board. Let's go ahead and get into it though with week 16. Our studs and duds. Ryan, we're going to kick it off with your quarterbacks. You expect a breakout week from Jared Goff and a dud week from Lamar Jackson. Let's dive into it a little bit.
Yeah, so kind of consistent with last week's theme. I want to target matchups. I want to target narratives. I want to target game scripts. And I think for Jared Goff here, I mean, this is a perfect matchup for him against a very old, very washed up Pittsburgh Steelers defense. They kind of remind me of the Washington Commanders in that way. And that's why I targeted Dart last week. This week, the Steelers just have a lot of old players. Jalen Ramsey's playing safety for them now. They got Cameron Hayward. TJ Watt seems like a shell of himself. I just think that on this fast track at home in Detroit, Jared Goff should have his way, should be able to do whatever he wants to this defense. And I think another thing that helps him out is actually the Steelers are pretty good against the run. So I think they might be able to shut down Jahmyr Gibbs. I believe they're top 10 in opposing fantasy points per game against the running back. So if they can shut down Gibbs even a little bit, I think that'll cause Detroit to lean on the air attack more resulting in big weeks for guys like Amon-Ra again, Jameson Williams again. So yeah, I mean, kind of just thinking back to when the Bears played the Steelers, because similar offense, things like that. Like, I don't think that we had any kind of success running the ball against them, but throwing the ball, it was really, really productive. And I think that Jared Goff can repeat that against a very bad defense. And also, Jared Goff's been having a really great year, kind of under the radar because of their record, but his numbers are they're really like MVP quality numbers. He's about 70% completion, 110 passer rating, touchdown interception ratios there. So really, if their record was better, we'd be talking about him in MVP discussions. So yeah, I don't think a team like Pittsburgh's not going to be able to do anything against him, in my opinion. So that's why I'm going with Jared Goff as my stud. And then the dud, Lamar Jackson. I mean, man, what a fall off this year. I hope it's the injury that's affecting it, and it's not just like, man, he's hit this certain age and we're never going to get the old Lamar Jackson back. But I think it's the injury. I think you can tell because every week, I don't think he practices on either Wednesday or Thursday every week. And I think that's a pretty big tell that something's still up with him. Since he's come back from injury, he's only had that one good week, I believe, against Miami in that primetime game. But since then, it's been a lot of duds in a row. And I think last week, some people might look at it and be like, well, he had a good game, but I wasn't impressed by that at all. I mean, he only threw the ball 12 times, had an interception, got sacked quite a bit, only put up 16 fantasy points against Cincinnati Bengals. I was expecting that to be a huge game for him. I think something's up with him still. I don't view the New England Patriots as a team that you're just going to have this magical breakout against when you're playing injured. New England's playing for the division. They're playing for the 1 seed. They're playing, you know what I mean? They're playing really good football. It's going to be a hard-fought matchup, probably a low-scoring game. So that's why I don't think Lamar Jackson is a very good matchup, especially against a team like New England.
Yeah, I'm very worried about Lamar, especially as Lamar Jackson owner. Like, you're going to, it's been just sad. But, like, it's also been like, am I going to sit Lamar Jackson? Like, I've played him every single week, and it's just been nothing but disappointment. And it's like, you don't want to be the guy who benches Lamar Jackson in a 2-quarterback league and you lose. And he does Lamar Jackson things and puts up 27 points, and I throw in there Brock Purdy and I lose. And Brock Purdy just has an average game. Like, that's just not something that I want to fall under. So it's like, it's the same thing with me, like talking about Justin Jefferson last week is my dud. It's like, are you going to bench Justin Jefferson? Like, can you? Like, it's tough.
Hopefully
you really should consider. Yeah, hopefully you did. But it's such a hard thing, and it's hard to blame somebody for that. And speaking of Brock Purdy, we can go ahead and get into my guys here. We got Brock Purdy as my stud of the week and Trevor Lawrence as my dud of the week. And with Brock Purdy and the San Francisco 49ers offense, I just think that they're starting to find their way. I think that they're really starting to find their way. They're getting healthy again across the board. Kittle had been battling injuries. Purdy, missed a good chunk of the season. Juwan Jennings has been in and out of the lineup. Christian McCaffrey's been their only bright spot, but you can really start to see their passing game working. And I know that, granted, it was against the Tennessee Titans just this last week, but you got the Colts again this week, and I think that they're starting to – I think that this is going to be one of those games where they're going to, maybe try and – not necessarily lighten the workload of Christian McCaffrey because he still does have a massive workload. But as they kind of inch closer to this playoff stretch that they're going to be going into, and then you got the Bears and the Rams, or the Bears and the Seahawks to finish off your last 2 games of the season, I could see them maybe wanting to put the ball in Purdy's hands more, air it out through the air, get into this rhythm, keep this rhythm going. I just think that this offense is going to start getting hot. I really do think it's going to start getting hot. Teams are so keyed in on Christian McCaffrey because of his skill set. And now that you have this healthy wide receiver core and George Kittle, who's been absolutely balling, I could see this become their game plan over the next couple weeks. And I think he's going to have a good game against the Colts. And then with Trevor Lawrence, I just think it's just screaming dud. After a massive week, he's starting to pick up the pace a little bit. And then you got the Denver Broncos, and you got to go into Denver. I'm sure it could be maybe a similar situation where his projections are going to be lower considering the defense that he's facing. But after the couple weeks that he's been having, I could see his projections being really high, and I just don't think you're going to get that out of him this week. The 2 games that he faced Houston this week, which is probably the only defense outside of maybe Green Bay that I would compare to the Denver Broncos unit, he's put up just back-to-back duds. And I think that we're going to see something very similar in Denver. This is just more matchup-based, a very athletic wide receiver, or very athletic DB group, very athletic pass rush. I don't see Trevor Lawrence going out there and replicating any success that he's had over the last couple of weeks against this Denver Broncos D.
Yeah, neither do I. But like you said, you might be falling into that same trap I did last week with this stud dud thing, especially with the projections. But yeah, I was close to picking Trevor Lawrence myself. I'm not a Trevor Lawrence believer. I don't think anything he's done in the past 5 or 6 weeks while they've been on this winning streak has impressed me at all. They haven't faced any good teams, like you said, teams like Houston, teams like Denver. Those are in a different tier than everybody else, just in terms of their pass rush. Really, all three levels of their defense have been playing really, really well. And yeah, like Denver's going to be heating them up. I've always thought of Trevor Lawrence as a guy that's really turnover prone when he's facing pressure, when he's in a big game, things like that. I mean, I could definitely see him, fumbling, throwing a couple picks. It just seems like that type of game for him. I don't think of him as a quarterback that's better than Jordan Love, and we saw Jordan Love struggle, just like we've seen almost every quarterback struggle against Denver, right? So I think it's going to be a bad Trevor game.
100%. Like, I could very well see this being like one of them 4 interception Trevor Lawrence games
Exactly.
Sunday. Like, they're super hot, they're rolling, and then he just has an absolute stinker.
He has the propensity for like some really bad ones before. Like you said, 4 interceptions. I could definitely see him having an all-time dud. And I like your Purdy pick too, because I think the wheels are going to be falling off with the Colts here shortly. I think Phillip Rivers is a nice story, but I don't think he's going to be able to consistently move the ball very much, and that's going to give San Francisco a lot of opportunities to score and possess the ball. So I do like that pick.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the running backs. We'll kick it off with me this time. I'm going with my stud, James Cook, coming off a big week. And then you got Ashton Jeanty of the Las Vegas Raiders. And with James Cook, I mean, we just watched the Cleveland Browns against our Chicago Bears this week. Did they look like they wanted to be there?
No.
Like, did they look so done. Like, they look like, all right, let's just get to the end of the season. Myles Garrett, get your sack record. Outside of that, we don't really give a shit anymore. Like, they look like they have no enthusiasm. The coaching staff look like they have no enthusiasm. They could be on their way out very soon. This could be their final 3 games there. I don't think they really have anything left going for them, but let's see, besides seeing, how Harold Fannin Jr. does, how Shedeur Sanders does, and if Myles Garrett can get the sack record. That's about all they have going for them. And I think this is just going to be one of those games for Buffalo. You're riding high. You're getting hot. I predicted that perfectly. I said this a momentum win over the Cincinnati Bengals. That comeback win over the Bengals was going to propel them into another huge momentum win over the New England Patriots. And I think this is going to be a total domination. This is going to just be like, give the ball to James Cook 30 times. I think he just runs it down their throats. I mean, we saw success from DeAndre Swift yesterday in the running game. The Bears ran the ball overly well, which they're, very good at doing. But the Bills just have just as good of a rushing attack as the Chicago Bears do. I expect James Cook to have even more success than DeAndre Swift did just yesterday. And then with Ashton Jeanty, that's also just a matchup nightmare in my eyes. Like, you got Kenny Pickett back there. They're going to probably trying to run the ball as much as they possibly can to get some sort of offensive function going. But over their last couple of weeks, dude, they've had some absolute monster defenses that they've gonna come across. And I don't think any of them have been Houston. Philadelphia, Jeanty didn't do nothing. They couldn't get anything going. Denver, Jeanty didn't do nothing. They couldn't get anything going. And I think it's going to be even worse with this defensive front from Houston. Like, I can't imagine any success outside of maybe like a 5 reception game for like 30 yards. Like, maybe he does hit like 10 points, but his yards per carry have been bad all year, and I can't imagine they're going to be any good this week against Houston.
Yeah, this is a nightmare matchup for Jeanty. I mean, it kind of reminds me of last week, Jonathan Taylor against Seattle, but like way worse, because the Colts at least had an offensive line and a really good play caller, things like that. I mean, this Raiders offense is just a train wreck. I don't even know who their OC is right now, but he's not doing any better than Chip Kelly was. This O-line's just a train wreck. Jeanty's getting contacted in the backfield like every run. So, yeah, I don't think that's going to be a good matchup at all. And then with James Cook, I kind of agree with you. The Browns, I mean, a lot of weak arm tackles against the Bears. Swift was running right through them like it was nothing. I think some business decisions being taken by them. So, yeah, I could definitely see James Cook getting going. And also, I think the Bills are going to be playing with a pretty big lead for the most part of the game. So, probably won't be putting it in the air very much.
Yeah, and I feel like a big part of my Jeanty pick as well was leaning on the offensive line. It's just really terrible for him to have the game that he had against the Philadelphia Eagles is almost inexcusable because, I mean, maybe I haven't watched too much Eagles games, but in the few Eagles games that I have watched this year, they can get ran on. I mean, the Bears was obviously a huge example, and we're talking about tier level differences between offensive lines there, but there's obviously no success in that rushing attack whatsoever. Just a nightmare season in general for the Raiders, and I think we're going to have another bad week for Ashton Jeanty owners, and it's unfortunate because that's been probably one of the most disappointing, I would say, young fantasy. I mean, this guy was a top 10 pick.
He's a good player too. I still like him. That's just
I do too.
Wow, what a bad situation, right?
Yeah, horrible nightmare. Let's go ahead and get into your running backs, Ryan. You're going with Devon Achane in Miami and Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams, and I'm excited to hear your Kyren Williams take. Let's get into it.
Yeah, that one was a bit out there, but I'll start with Devon Achane. I think this is a perfect matchup for him. In Miami, fast track, warm weather, so you don't have to worry about any weird elements in play. Cincinnati Bengals are, I think, the worst run defense in the league. So I'm kind of going back to the well with that pick after my Derrick Henry pick last week failed. But to be fair, I'm pretty sure Derrick Henry had like 10 yards per carry. It was a really weird stat line. It was like 11 carries, 100 rushing yards. But I think Devon Achane is even a different class of fantasy running back just because of his receiving volume. I think Miami Dolphins, I mean, we'll see how they do tonight. But I think they really funnel their entire offense through Devon Achane, just both in the run and the pass. I mean, I can't even think of like another player that has that kind of workload. Maybe Christian McCaffrey, obviously, but like it's really, since Tyreek Hill has went down, it's really just become an offense that runs solely through, Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane as a two-player offense. I guess Darren Waller's getting some of the work as well, but yeah, Devon Achane has such a big just share of that volume through the Miami Dolphins, and I think against Cincinnati Bengals, the Dolphins should be expected to score 20 to 30 points. Mike McDaniel's coaching for his job, and I think he's putting together a good little win streak here, so he's not going to be laying off the gas. He's going to be trying to win every single game, and he knows in order to do that, he's got to give Devon Achane as many touches as he possibly can because that's their most explosive weapon. And I think Cincinnati at this point, they've phoned it in. They're probably also thinking about their vacation plans, and I don't think they're going to be trying to go out there and tackle a guy that's running a 4.2 40, right? Like, it's going to be a tough matchup for Cincinnati. And then Kyren Williams, definitely a bit out there because the Rams, I think they're a little bit matchup proof at this point. They've shown they can score points against anybody. But I think this matchup in Seattle, and then I think specifically it being a Thursday game, kind of scares me because we've already seen this turn into a bit of a timeshare of a backfield with Blake Corum.
Yep.
And I think when you're thinking about the Rams, you're thinking Super Bowl. Like, that's their aspirations. I don't think that on 3 days rest or 4 days rest, whatever it is, they're not going to be giving Kyren Williams this full, huge workload. Even though this is a really important game, I think if they're going to be playing it safe with one of their best players, they're not going to give him 20, 25 carries. They're going to give him probably half of the snap percentage even, keep them fresh, keep them ready for the postseason and the bigger goals that they have ahead. And also, on top of that, Seattle being a top 5 run defense and it being in a very hostile environment doesn't help him at all either. So I think it's a little out there because the Rams probably will still score a lot of points. Devontae Adams being out maybe increases his involvement even, but I don't know. I don't like the fact that it's a Thursday game and that it's, a really good defense in Seattle.
I think the good defense and the split backfield starting to become more of a thing is really a good proven point. And you were on that from the jump this year. You were noticing the juice from Corum in like week 5 or 6, and you were saying when's his workload going to get bigger? And here we are. It's finally getting to that point. And I think you kind of nailed it on the head here. I still could see him having like a 13, 14 point game, just like you said, probably get a touchdown, maybe mix in like 60 yards and, maybe like a catch or two. But I don't see him having an absolute boomer. And, when you're thinking about Kyren Williams in this Rams offense, especially over the last couple of years, is, been probably a top 5 fantasy back. So I could see him still. I'm going to lean with the dud. I think we'll call it 12 points in my head right now. We're going to call it 12 points from Kyren Williams. My odds are he's projected more. Maybe not because it is a good defense and, it is a split backfield, but we're going to stick with the dud. I like the pick. I really do like the pick. What do we got here next? We're going to get into your wide receivers, Ryan. Nico Collins, your stud of the week, and your dud of the week, Mike Evans, man. That's another guy right there. You've just picked. So you've given me the dud that I'm going up against in Kyren Williams, but you're giving the guy that I'm going up against in my biggest matchup this week, stud, in Nico Collins. So I'm intrigued to hear what you got to say.
Yeah, I think Nico Collins, the breakout that we've been waiting for is here. I mean, all year it seems like he's been dealing with something, whether it's injury, whether it's, the Texans offense just looking disastrous and not able to really produce anything. I think it's finally clicking for Houston. Their offense is getting going in the right time. That's why they've been on such a streak and why everybody's looking at them now as dark horse contenders. I mean, I wouldn't say their offense is still great, but when you're talking about a matchup that you want to go against, definitely Las Vegas is one of them. I mean, we saw what Philly did against them last week. And I kind of think of Philly's offense as kind of this in the same boat as Houston's, in the same sense that there's a lot of play calling issues. I think Houston has more problems with the O-line than Philly does, but still kind of an anemic offense that can get exposed against good teams. But against bad teams like Las Vegas, I think they're not going to have any problem. So I expect CJ Stroud to have another big game. Arizona last week, he did the same thing. Nico Collins has put together a couple of really, really strong games now. I think 3 in a row where he's been around 20 fantasy points. I don't expect that to change against Las Vegas, who's one of the worst teams against receivers, fantasy-wise, 21st against fantasy wide receivers. And Nico Collins has had, a good stretch of games here. I think he's mostly been the only real fantasy option in this Houston Texans offense, and I expect him to put up a lot of points. So I would say he's on pace for another 20-point game, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And then as for the Mike Evans one, it's another one that's interesting because it seems like he always produces no matter what. Like he came back off of 3-month hiatus and put up 19 fantasy points last week. Seems like he's kind of even matchup proof in a way. But I look at this matchup, I think it's going to be against J.C. Horn, who's one of the best corners in the league. And then just looking at the Tampa Bay offense and Baker Mayfield specifically, Baker Mayfield's had a tough stretch of games here. And I think he's playing through a really bad shoulder injury that's really affecting him. So I'm kind of going off the fact that it's a tough matchup for Mike Evans specifically against one of the best corners in the league. And then Baker Mayfield with a really bad injury. Also in a divisional matchup against Carolina, I don't expect things to become like a shootout there. I think it's going to be a very low scoring game. So and also just a lot of options. Chris Godwin's in the offense, Emeka Egbuka, Bucky Irving. So I don't think Mike Evans is going to be this dominant, target share monster while he's getting shadowed by a top 3, top 5 corner in this league. So I'm kind of banking on that being the reason why he's a dud.
Yeah, 100% with the Mike Evans situation and just the Bucks and the Panthers game. I also feel like this is maybe like a Kyren Williams situation, the same thing. Like he could still, just because Baker favors him so heavily and he has for a while now, he still could get like 5 receptions for 60 yards. But relative dud, don't expect big, fantasy production, especially anything that we seen last week. And I think you nailed it on the head with just this matchup. Like this just screams 17-14 final, doesn't it? Like it just 2 piss poor teams in the AFC or in the NFC South who have been really kind of both struggling, having their waves up and downs. I mean, come on, the Panthers, like they've beaten the Packers and the Rams this year and they've lost to the Saints twice. Like that's
they're such a weird team.
Such a weird team. This just screams low scoring matchup. I like that pick. And then Nico Collins, I feel like with the offensive struggles that the Houston Texans have seen over the last few years, and you're finally finding a spark, like regardless of like, game script or whatever, like they're probably going to beat the shit out of the Raiders. Like that's something you probably don't want to slow down, like that connection. Like you don't want to stop that connection just because like, oh, we could probably run the ball for 100 times against the Raiders and have a really good rushing game. Like, let's not throw the ball too much. Let's keep Nico Collins healthy and CJ Stroud healthy. I can't see them wanting to stop that. Like, because I feel like this is building so much momentum off this connection that they're going to just keep feeding Nico Collins and keeping that connection building as they get closer to the postseason. Because this is one of the hottest teams in football right now. The defense is insane. The offense is starting to finally click. Yeah, they beat up on some bad teams, but they're really making things work right now. And I can't see them slowing that down. All right, let's get into my studs and duds here. We're running it back. We are running it back with Jameson Williams, and we're going with George Pickens as my dud. And honestly, like I said last week, when I was doing my studs and duds, we were not on the same page. I was not on the same page with Lucas and Ryan at all. And I was going off of strictly, essentially, like all playoffs, like all fantasy playoffs. Like these are going to be studs for the entire postseason. These are going to be duds for the entire postseason. Jameson Williams was like my go-to. This is the wide receiver stud of the playoffs. You've seen him have a huge game yesterday against the Los Angeles Rams, outscored his projections by 12 points against a good defense. Yeah, it's a high-powered offense, but that's still a tough defense to do that to. This was the matchup, though, that I had circled when I was doing Jameson Williams last week, and I knew immediately I was going to have to run it back next week. You already touched on Jared Goff against this Pittsburgh Steelers defense, and I talked about how Jameson Williams and his speed across the middle, I think, is one of the top 5 most dangerous threats in the NFL in total. We're talking about just old, beat up defense. There is not a single player on that Steelers defense in that secondary that can keep up with Jameson Williams. None. I think we're going to get crossers all day long. He is going to be open all day long, and he is going to score a lot of fucking fantasy points on Sunday. I think he's going to go insane again. I expect him to have 25 plus again. I'm sure his projections are going to be a little bit higher than they were last week, so a little bit more pressure on him. But I think he is going to have another massive week. He's been one of the hottest wide receivers in fantasy football over the last few weeks in general, and I think he's just going to be balling. I think he's averaging 21 points per game over his last 3, and I don't see that slowing down in any way, shape, or form this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then my dud, George Pickens, there is clearly just something off over the last 3 weeks with him. I think he has less than a 50% catch percentage, even dating back to his Kansas City game, which he had a pretty good game, but he saw 13 targets, only had 6 receptions. Last week he caught 4 for 9, and then this week he caught 3 for 6. I think that there's clearly something off in this Cowboys and Dak Prescott George Pickens connection. CeeDee Lamb's obviously back, and he was really playing good, and a lot of his production was coming with no CeeDee Lamb. But even when he was back, he still put up a few good weeks. But I don't know if it's just George Pickens of Pittsburgh is back, just the frustration, the losing, the playoffs being out of the question. But there's something seriously wrong with this connection right now. And you're going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. And Jesse Minter has done a really good job at taking away elite players out of the game plan all year long. I know DK's had duds against them. Rashee Rice had a really poor game against them yesterday. I don't see George Pickens having any sort of success this upcoming weekend against the Chargers. I think that this is an arguable bench, really. I think that there's got to be some real cause for some concern this week. And if you have a guy, I don't know who, but a mid-tier guy like a Khalil Shakur or Jawan Jennings, one of those guys, I would seriously consider playing them over George Pickens this week. And it's tough because of the production that he's put up. But I think that this is one of those causes for a bench.
I support that. I support any George Pickens slander. He was my dud last week, so I'm definitely on the same page as you. That obviously paid its dividends with him having a really bad week last week. I do kind of think narratively though, maybe the Cowboys are out of it. Maybe Dak tries to get his boy going, get his boy paid. I also think maybe conversely, Jerry Jones being petty, being hey, just don't throw the ball to him anymore. We can get him for cheaper. I don't know. Maybe that's too much conspiracy talk. But just focusing on the actual games that are happening, he's not been impressive. Something's dropped off with his effort. Like you said, CeeDee Lamb being the number 1 there. And like you said, I don't think that the Cowboys are going to really be putting up a ton of points against the Chargers. So it's probably not going to be enough offensive output to support 2 wide receiver ones like the Cowboys sometimes have this year. So I expect CeeDee Lamb to have a good game, but not George Pickens. Maybe, 4 catches, 30 yards, something like that.
Yeah, 100%. And they're still alive, technically. So I guess they still do have something to play for.
Well, the Eagles play Saturday, right? So technically they could be out, I think.
Yeah, because I'd put them at 10 wins, and then that would eliminate them. So they could be duds by then. So who knows? And the Eagles play the Commanders, so good chance the Cowboys they probably will be eliminated come Sunday, unfortunately, actually, now that we're sitting here thinking about it. But I don't expect them to fully roll over, but I think it's just more matchup in the last few weeks, something not being right between the two, the connection seemingly being gone. Let's go ahead and move into the tight ends, and we are going with stud for me, Travis Kelce, which is kind of a ballsy pick. I'm taking a page out of the Lucas Hoig handbook with that selection. And then Harold Fannin Jr., kind of another ballsy dud. I will say, I don't feel overly confident in either of these selections, but I'll go ahead and explain to it. Mahomes out for the year. Dunzo. Torn ACL. Very sad situation. And you got Gardner Minshew coming in and stepping in. Just feel like this is the safety blanket. Lucas kind of touched on that with Tyler Warren. Except they were going against the Seattle Seahawks defense. They got Tennessee this week, which has not fared well. Harold Fannin had a massive week against the Tennessee Titans just a few weeks ago. Who did Tennessee just play this week?
49ers.
Kittle. Yep, Kittle. Yep. Massive week. I could very well see Travis Kelce being the safety blanket for Gardner Minshew. Rashee Rice, I also expect to not necessarily have a massive fall off, but guys like Xavier Worthy, dead.
Yep.
Good, dead. Like there's not going to be any Xavier Worthy production going on this week, but I expect Kittle to be the number one safety blanket in this Kansas City offense against a bad Tennessee defense. So I expect Kittle to have a big week. And then with Harold Fannin Jr., this is kind of a really shaky one because this is like Shadeur's guy. Like if anything proved in that massive outbreak game that he had against Tennessee, like Shedeur loves him. And he came back this week against the Chicago Bears, and he threw him the ball 14 times. Unfortunately, only led to 7 catches and like 50-something yards, finished with 12 points, just slightly above his projection. But the Bears were keyed in on that. I think defenses are going to start to key in on that. And they got the Buffalo Bills this week, who are phenomenal against tight ends. Very athletic linebacking core. Guys that can go toe-to-toe with the very athletic Harold Fannin Jr. I think that they're going to be very keyed in on him. That is a good way. I mean, like I said, their success against the Chicago Bears defense was very abysmal yesterday, and he only caught 50% of his passes, and they were very dink and dunks. He wasn't getting anything going in the deep game. He wasn't getting anything really going over the middle of the field, just more on the numbers, 5-yard receptions. I mean, it wasn't overly great, 7 receptions for 50 yards. That's less than 10 yards per reception. So it wasn't a massively great game for Harold Fannin Jr., despite still being targeted 14 times. I think that's going to be something that the Browns maybe look to try and get away from, as using him as a safety net for Shedeur. So I expect him to have a pretty poor week.
I like that. Yeah. I kind of feel like the Bills defense is similar to the Bears, at least like anecdotally it feels like that, because, you know, neither are very good against good teams, right? Like they're pretty disappointing with how many points they give up and how many yards and things like that. But I expect against a bad team like Cleveland, like those are the games where the defense gets going, they tee off, they, you know, pad their stats a little bit. I don't think Shedeur Sanders can beat a team that's like, not even beat, but like produce against a team that's actually trying to win. Obviously, the Bills are trying to come first in the division, still in that race. So I expect them to completely shut down Cleveland's offense to the point where Harold Fannin could still get his maybe in garbage time, but it's hard to rely on that. So yeah, when you're picking a dud, it's a pretty safe pick to pick a player on a team that's just not going to really score. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they got like completely shut out. So I like that. Yeah. And then yeah, for your stud Travis Kelce, I feel like when Gardner Minshew came in, didn't it seem like every time he threw the ball it was to Travis Kelce? Even that interception, with 14
points. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like I wouldn't be surprised if they have a nice connection there. Like you said, safety blanket. And then it just seems like those two guys would get along, just knowing their personalities. So, yeah, I could definitely see a little connection brewing there. Same with Rashee Rice, too, though. I think Rashee Rice is mostly an underneath receiver. But, yeah, like you said, Xavier Worthy is completely cooked. So all their offense is going to be going through those two guys.
All right, here we go, Ryan. To finish us off, your wide receiver or your tight end studs and duds to wrap up Week 16's video here. You're going with George Kittle and Brock Bowers. You're also doubling down like I did on Jameson Williams as George Kittle as your stud, and then Brock Bowers as your dud. Back-to-back weeks with somebody as Brock Bowers as their dud. As a Brock Bowers dynasty owner in a big matchup this week, not a fan of that pick, but let me hear it.
Well, it worked out last week, right? So, but yeah, going back to the well with George Kittle. Like I said, targeting, you know, just upside safety. Last week, my reasoning was mostly just George Kittle's one of the safest plays you can have. It seems like he's gotten healthy. That late bye probably helped out a lot, and I expect the 49ers, like you were saying with the Brock Purdy reasoning, to just have a lot of opportunity to air it out. Also, just like I said, the Indianapolis Colts aren't going to have a very good offensive attack, so I expect the Niners to have the ball quite a bit. George Kittle is going to have a safe floor, high ceiling. The Colts are one of the worst teams against the tight end position, so that also plays in George Kittle's favor. And I just think he's the type of player to, really produce. I mean, I feel like every time he's been healthy in his career, he's put up big numbers. The only
Yeah.
time he has quote unquote duds is when he leaves midway through the game or he's playing through like 4 different injuries or something. So
Yeah.
I feel like George Kittle he's just lock him in your lineup and leave him there at this point. And then with the dud, Brock Bowers, Brock Bowers is probably a top 3 tight end talent, maybe the most talented tight end in the league. But it's kind of like the Harold Fannin thing. It's like when you're when you're looking at an offense that might not even score the ball against the opposing team, like in the entire game, it's hard to go with anybody in that team's lineup other than just like you banking on complete PPR production and he gets like 8 to 9 targets or something, or maybe a garbage time touchdown. But I just think like the offense is a complete disaster. We already talked about it with the Genty selection as the dud. It's just an awful low line. I can see Brock Bowers being asked to maybe even block a little bit more with just how fierce that pass rush is. They don't want the tight end to die. Kind of like last week with, once again, like with Tyler Warren, my reasoning for him being a dud was just because like there's not going to be a lot of offensive output here and he's going to have to stay in and block a little bit more than usual because the quarterback is otherwise probably going to leave on like a stretcher halfway through the game if he doesn't get protected. So Brock Bowers is not going to be a good option this week unless they use him more as a receiver. But even then, I don't see how Kenny Pickett or if Geno Smith's back, I don't see how they're going to move the ball against the best defense in the league while that team is still playing for playoff positioning.
Yeah, they were shut out. They've also been shut out twice this year, which is the
Jeez.
first time since like 2000 that a team has been shut out twice in one season. And I mean, like we going over under 6.5 points on this Raiders offense against the Texans defense. Like genuinely, like I can't imagine them having any production. So what you're telling me though is that I should start Colson Loveland.
I mean, Loveland's a tough one too, though, because his volume is still so low in this offense. I know Roma Dunze's being out should help, but I feel like even with his, increase in production, he's still only getting like 4 or 5 targets a game, right? It's mostly just been touchdowns.
It's such a spread out offense.
Yep.
Such a spread out offense.
So that's risky.
Because
I feel like if the Raiders do anything, it's going to be through Bowers, but I just don't think they're going to do anything.
Yeah, 100%. All right, that's a good point. I'm probably going to start Brock Bowers because I don't want to be the idiot that benches Brock Bowers if he has a good game. But that's going to go ahead and wrap up our Week 16 studs and duds. Thanks always to Ryan Cash Sharma for hopping on and talking Dynasty Ball. Hopefully we get Lucas back next week for championship weekend. It's a big one. We'll see if any of us are still alive heading into next week's video. Hopefully I am. I got two swings at it. 2 swings at it. So we'll see. Thank you guys so much for tuning into another video. Talk to you soon. Peace.